concern that I have is, yes, when I look at our inflation has come down from 3-digit level to around 50%. My hope is that when you look at now going forward, an average monthly interest in inflation of 3% will not take us much, because an average inflation of about 3% will, it means our inflation will still be high in year-on-year terms, maybe even closer to 40%. And that would be worrying for me, because what it means is that sustained high level of inflation has negative impact on interest rates. Certainly, if we want to be competitive, we can't have industries borrowing at 60%. So how do you pass that margin to your consumers? So maybe these are the structural issues from a business initiative that we also want to focus on, to say, yes, we have celebrated inflation that has come from 3-digit level to about 50%. So the thrust is to make sure that that inflation has really come down to maybe even below 20%, because we also want to link that inflation with the lending cost, and that lending cost will give us that competitive advantage. So in a nutshell, Mr. Minister, I thought those are key initiatives that you have really highlighted, and maybe I'll open the floor to to colleagues. If there are other comments and questions, please let's share it with the minister. Mr. Mike, we have a roving mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for very insightful. I always enjoy your presentations. I've got 3 short comments and then 1 question, Honorable Minister. The first one is, I think it'll be remiss of us not to acknowledge the work you've done on the balancing the books. You've taken balancing the books, I believe, to the right place where we never have to think about it. I've always said, we spend so much time in Zimbabwe talking about balancing the books, and all the countries we're competing with, they never talk about it. It's where it should be. It should just be happening. So I acknowledge you for that, and your ministry, Minister. I also just want to comment around digitization. I think that's critical. It removes a lot of corruption. Minister, in one of the government departments, one of the secretaries asked me to see something so that I could get into the elevator. So, it's just an example, but really digitization is critical, and it will wipe out a lot of corruption. Final observation, Minister, you talked about corporate, investment banking, and I know you're passionate about this. It's something that also worries me, and I just want to share a little story. And I don't know what's happening to young people these days. When we were 26, 27, some of us were already involved in this, and I remember we worked with Barbican, we worked with Kingdom Bank. Yes, no, Honorable Minister, this is very true. I share with people that when I was 26 years old, I used to meet with you almost weekly to do investment banking deals in Bulawayo, etc. So I think I challenge young people to really change their mindsets, to say that even if you're 25, 26, it doesn't mean you should just be spending your time in bars. You can really change things. And I hope that returns back into Zimbabwe. My question, Minister, is, I think that for me, when we look at the black market premium, up to 20% we can work, 20 to 50% we're stressed, but we're working. Above 50%, we start to see the Zim dollar really coming under an onslaught, where perhaps it's actually in danger. These numbers are not scientific, but I want to introduce this thinking in government to say that perhaps that premium, while we may be able to calculate the rate academically, that premium is also an important indicator, and above 50% starts to create problems for us. And really, so it's a question and a comment, but something perhaps to get the creative juices that are going.
I think there is a question left. Maybe gentleman here.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for your presentation. Always insightful, and your body language is always very inspiring. In terms, you are calm, collected, and give the sense of really that things are under control. I think some of our challenges come from the fact that we are growing. We are a growing economy. We are pulling in more raw materials from outside of Zimbabwe than we have been doing. So that creates pressure. And then add to that some of the past economic trauma that people have been, add to that some of the negative energy that is out there. All these things sort of militate against what you are seeing. So I think forums like this help us to sort of really get a check on what's really going on. I just wanted to maybe, and I agree with the Vice President, Mr. Mkanganwi there, that we really need a vibrant financial services sector, and the licensing of just commercial banks is part of the issue. I think we need to have those merchant banking licenses that were there, the investment banking licenses that were there, the infrastructure, your Genesis banks, and so on, that focus on specific areas. Right now, we have just building societies and commercial banks, and everybody is looking for deposits. It's sort of plain vanilla. Mr. Wadi is from that sector, but it's really a challenge. You find it's becoming so generic, so plain vanilla, and the creativity of your trust banks, your Barbicans, is no longer there. And that's what created your TZI, some of the companies that we knew that were making waves then. So I don't know whether it's an area, Minister, that can be looked at in terms of licensing and reviving the licensing. The second point I wanted to make very quickly is our conversations yesterday were around localization of raw materials, which is a big area. So we've localized production, but we have not localized the raw materials. And that's going to take, for example, I think our chief economist, Mr. Dube, highlighted the issue of caustic soda, which is used in manufacturing, is used in mining. Big chemical, comes from salt. It's sodium chloride. With my A-level chemistry, I still remember that. So this is an area where that creativity that we're talking about, the financial creativity and support from Ministry of Finance to localize raw materials. Edible oils, our sector, a few years ago, 10% was locally produced, 90% imported. Today, the equation is the other way around. But the raw materials for that sector are still coming in the form of an import. So your support in localizing raw materials as to support economic growth, as well as import substitution, as well as export generation. My last point, Honorable Minister, just to find out your thoughts on shared manufacturing. So we have a South Africa, which is the big brother in the region. Their setup is they build huge factories in their country and export to the rest of Africa. That is structurally, for the region, it's structurally skewed. Creates employment in South Africa, then you have xenophobia, etc., etc. I think Zimbabwe has got a position where we can do things differently and get into what is known as shared manufacturing through the use of intermediate products. If we get our agricultural right, produce soya beans, we can export the very same crude oil that we are being accused or often say you're gobbling up forex. We can turn it around. Rwanda imports, for example, crude oil. Mozambique, the same, the whole region. So in structuring manufacturing in the region, especially under AFCFTA minister, we can have partnerships where we produce some goods here, export, and have manufacturing capacity in those brother or sister countries, so that we have those linkages. I believe if we structure it that way, it's more sustainable. It's different from what we've been used to. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Clive Oxton Willows, Managing Director of Refair. We are manufacturing in the cold chain in Bulawayo, is where our factory is. Honourable Minister, thank you. It's good that you are pushing forward as far as retooling drive. But first of all, I'd just like to say from the heart, from manufacturing, on behalf of CZI, and not to be an embarrassment to them, but I'm just saying it as it is that we have been promised funding from yourself in the Bulawayo area going back 18 months, 1 year. We have written letters, we have followed up to find out where is this funding coming from. We've had no response. It's all, and I noticed that you've said this again, and that there is going to be funding made available. I'm just saying as it is that there has been nothing. It's where we said it's going at a snail pace. I don't know how that gets rectified, but we've had no answers to our emails as to where we can find this funding. And just one other thing that I'd like to mention is also to do with the agricultural side. We manufacture to do with the cold chain, which is probably 70% of the business that we can do from Zimbabwe in agriculture in the cold chain. But now I think the agricultural minister, maybe with a wave of the hand, has dropped all duties for importation and even the products that we make here in Zimbabwe. And that's shooting the industry in the foot. We are still paying duty on raw materials for manufacturing, and yet we are importing what we make here duty-free. This doesn't make sense. This is not good for industry. Yeah, you know, I just made a few other notes here, but you know, industry should be the backbone of industry.
On duty on raw materials?
Well, as I understand it, I can't hear too well, but I think as I understand it is that the importation, we've worked on projects for big potato rooms and so on, and for quite some time, and the clients have now come back and said that they can now import the product that we manufacture here duty-free from elsewhere through the agricultural ministry. I don't know what SI it is, but this is what's happened. But I can give you that information later on. That's no problem. Industry should be the backbone of Zimbabwe, and if we can develop and put in new tooling, new plant, we can generate further exports, and I think it's going to pay dividends within the next 5 years. That's thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I take one last. Oh, I see there are quite a lot. How best do we? All right, two more. All right, please. Two more. I think from the lady and the gentleman.
Hello. Oh, all right. I've got a question for the Finance Minister. My name is Victor from CZI. So these are concerns from the business sector in the industry. And one of them, looking at Africa Free Continental Trade Area, one of the concerns that we're battling is the cost of production on the local market. And one of the key issues that feed into the cost of local production is the cost of fuel. And on average, in the SADC region, diesel costs around $1 Petrol costs around $7. In Zimbabwe, it's around $40, $38. From a treasury point of view, can we be able to get a review of the duties and the taxes that are charged on fuel so that we can be able to control the cost of production?
So thank you, Minister, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. I'll start with the COVID-19 situation. So in spite of our impressive vaccination drive, it looks like COVID-19 is going to be something that we need to learn to live with. And in saying that, what support is there to industry to create COVID-safe working environments? Because I think that indeed will make a difference as well. Will we be using some of the SDRs towards that? I think that's the question with that as well. You also mentioned the issue of smuggling. And I think that with smuggling, this is more of a symptom, the cause of which is a combination of low income and highly priced local goods. So I think the investment should focus more on addressing those two as opposed to the investment towards drones and CCTV, etc. Because I think for as long as people need to eat, they will find a way. In terms of local production, I think the 70% is good, but it would also be good to look at this in tandem with affordability. The overall point of locally producing goods is so that we can afford them. So let's consider, are we having affordable goods that are locally produced? Thank you.
Okay. Maybe last question.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for your presentation. My question, or rather my input, is regards the topical issue around the foreign exchange system. Minister, I think it is my observation that the auction as is currently constituted doesn't really give impetus to correct and faster price discovery. Why do I say so? At the moment, we are holding auctions every one auction in 7 days, and industry is having to use the same exchange rate for a period of 7 days. That's number one. And number two, the foreign exchange system on the reserving side is only meeting about 34% of our total import requirement as an economy a month. And the rest of it, the 66%, is being settled via cash cover payments, probably from individuals who are sourcing their own foreign currency, which is accounting for the remaining 66%. So my observation in this regard is that it is completely unfair, and or rather it is inappropriate for the 34% of the market to determine the overall reference exchange rate for an entire economy. So how do we get around this challenge, in my opinion? We have 1.7 billion sitting in FCA accounts. So it is my hope that this should be the starting point in order to extend the foreign auction system to banks as primary participants. So for example, if you have an individual holding excess US dollar liquidity in their account, we should be able to allow the individual to name a price for his money and then see if that money has takers at an open market exchange rate, and then allow on a daily basis, populate the total number of bids that you have seen in the market across the 16 commercial banks. You have a mechanism to incorporate that as a daily reference exchange rate, which the market can then augment. And then using the ratios, the 34 to 66%, you have some sort of a weighting system that you have, say on a Tuesday, you have the reference rate that you are getting off the auction, and then you have the daily auction rate that you are getting from the interbank market, which are the banks. Then you have the compromise exchange rate between the two. I'm sure that that will be an exchange rate that best speaks to probably the 20 to 30% premium that the regulator is targeting to have in terms of the premium between the two markets. Thank you very much. My name is Richard. I'm from Stewart Bank.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Just before Minister comes, I think there's a Honda Fit white AAFD 5695, which is blocking other cars. If we can move it, it will be good. Minister, you may have the floor.
Colleagues, let me thank you for your contributions and questions. Certainly, I'm listening very attentively. Some of these contributions will find their way into the national budget for 2022, I can assure you. It's also budget consultation for us here. Starting with a contribution from Mucham Kanganwi. Yes, really, we buttress the issue around investment banking. Yeah. Let's hope that we can move the needle there. Which also made this a similar point. Now, one of the things could be training. For example, if I realize that when we introduce the Zimbabwe dollar, you would think that people know how to do proper treasury work on the back of a domestic currency. Actually, there's a dearth of skills. Just simple trading of currency was an issue. Why? Because if you have treasurers who have gone through a fixed exchange rate, or rather a monocurrency like US dollar, you don't do any proper treasury management. Currency trading, there's nothing to trade there. So I think skills development is key. So we've been reflecting on how we can work with the banking sector and the Securities Commission to literally conduct training for the private sector in this regard. We have the Toronto Financial Center. They are very good at that. And also the Reuters used to run some interesting courses in the past. I don't know if they still do, but we're heading that direction. Your analysis is correct that we have to watch that premium between the auction and the power market as an indicative variable as to whether the currency is under pressure or not, and that we should do something. I agree with you. We have been watching it, spending more time now watching it. I agree with you that the moment it's about 50%, it raises eyebrows and we ought to act or change something. Then building on CISA's specific contribution, which is let's license more investment banks. I agree. I think that's what we should do. Almost encourage them to come forward. Lower the capital requirements and let's get those banks going. I agree with that. Then on localization of raw materials, this is a really, really interesting point. It's easy to think about value addition at the end of the product. Welcome, Minister Nzeza. It's easy to think about value addition as value addition in the final product. But we don't spend enough time thinking about the input aspect. So I really like this point. And I will need to reflect to see, with Clive and others in the budget, how we can incentivize the localization of raw materials. So here we're talking about really localizing the value chain, right? From the localizing the value chain from the beginning, that maybe that's where we should focus, and then we minimize on imports. We'll reflect on that, see how best to support it in the budget. If you have ideas, we will happily take those on board. Again, the idea of shared manufacturing. Again, this is about, let me call it a value chain aspect in the manufacturing process, not just making the end product here, but perhaps making an intermediate product which can be finished off elsewhere. That's how I'd understood it, which is exactly how an iPad is made. You don't have one manufacturer of an iPad. You have several companies making different components, but there's a coordination, there's a cluster mentality that ends up then putting this iPad together. I'm just choosing an iPad. It happens in most industries, by the way. So this is a very interesting concept indeed, the idea of shared manufacturing, clustering. Then I think it's Clive, yeah? Did I get your name right? This other Clive, not our Clive in the government. Yes, I must admit, I think accessing the government support under COVID that we extended has not been easy for industry. We've learned some lessons there. It's just not been easy to get industry to access the resource. We have the guarantee in place. We say go to your bank, and even just getting that information out for you to know that you just go to a bank. Then when you apply, then the bank then also ought to inform government. That wasn't clear enough, and we are aware that this really has hampered the progress on this facility. This time around, we think that we've gone one up, where we actually will provide a cash guarantee because the cash guarantee, it goes to a specific bank as the first move. Then on the back of that cash guarantee, then we can say go to that specific bank. They will look into it. If they're already your bank, even better, and then you know exactly where to go. So we think that the system will be better this time around and be able to deliver the results and the support that you require. Then on from Victor, you mentioned the cost of production locally being high, and you mentioned the issue of fuel, then fuel duties and so forth. Well, you know, there are so many things that we ought to really temper in terms of cost of power, the cost of fuel, and all of this adds up to our cost of production. But we have put forward a specific proposal. We will look into this. Basically, we've been using this excise duty as part of our price stabilization strategy. And we used it this month. We used it again in August, where we used it to keep the price where it is. It ought to have gone up, but we didn't allow it, and in fact use the taxes to stabilize the price. So it has its uses. So if you take it away completely, then you also taken away the price stabilization mechanism as well when the tough when things are tough. But we'll reflect on it to see how best to respond to this request without losing the price stabilization aspect of the tax. But the cost of production issue is well made, and sources of pain where the shoe pinches would be fuel, would be power, sometimes labor, but I didn't think that was the biggest one. I think those two I've mentioned, and then transportation costs. Speaking to some of the cement producers, they tell you that cost of logistics is the biggest headache that they have. So it's something that we should look at. And then on the COVID-19 aspect, learning to live with it, creating a safe environment for industry to continue producing in the face of COVID. Of course, one aspect, I don't have a holistic answer here. One aspect is the use of ICT, where employees are able to work from home, work remotely to do what they do. But of course, you cannot work remotely from a factory if you are on the factory floor. So that does create challenges naturally. So there are limits to which we can even distance in that way using ICT. But clearly, the digital aspect is one way to manage a COVID situation. You're right. To an extent, the smuggling that we see is a symptom. It reflects on the vibrancy and size of our informal sector. And so, but at the same time, we should not allow something that we disallow in law just because it's reflecting some reality out there. We still have to stop it or discourage it. But we also know that we can't kill it completely. We're also practical. We know that no matter how many drones you deploy, someone will still go through and the system will just switch off while you are watching the screen, and while it's off, someone is getting things through. That's human behavior. So we know we can't stop it completely. Yes, it's a symptom. But let me say this about the informal sector. The informal sector is very vibrant. I often hear calls that the informal sector should be formalized. That's a good thing. But I think if you do the simple things like just provide the right infrastructure, formal sector to operate from, ensure the right adequate services for them to thrive. That's okay. It becomes a problem for formal industry because then they start competing with you and so forth. But where government sits, it's not necessarily a bad idea. So, but if you're in industry, it's an issue because then that's competition for you. So having a large an informal sector is not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, we lose on taxes here and there, but we've been innovative as well in trying to harness taxes from the sector. You mentioned the issue of affordable, locally produced goods. I think that links with the cost of production issue. That yes, it's preferable to have cheaper locally produced goods. It's also linked to this issue of domesticating the raw materials aspect. All of that would fit into affordable, locally produced goods eventually. Then on then from Richard from is it Richard from Stewart Bank? Yes, we made a contribution regarding how we could redesign, enhance the auction. Frankly, all these are useful ideas. We'll take these on board and see whether what you're talking about could be incorporated. We want this to work. We want it to be effective. But let me say this, Richard. You know, the auction was never designed to provide all the foreign currency out there. Never. It was meant to facilitate in the price discovery process. But as you do that, you have to sell something. You have to sell some forex. That's what we are doing. So the idea is that once the auction is set a price or signaled where the price is, then you could go ahead and trade with whomsoever, legally, of course, or your bank then could also sell you forex at that rate with some margin, naturally. So that's really the idea, that the auction is never meant to provide all the forex. It cannot. It's just a price discovery process to assist in the pricing of the forex. Or the forex. You are suggesting perhaps that even there could be a daily auction of sorts between banks and so forth. But there's another issue that I know banks face, especially foreign versus local banks. Sometimes they cannot trade with each other because of KYC issues and so forth, where the risk management departments in their head offices, which sit elsewhere other than Zimbabwe, won't really allow these banks to trade locally owned banks because of some of these your customer issues. In banking, you live for risk management. I tell you, it's become a big issue globally. It's not easy. So sometimes while this suggestion is good, it may run foul of that challenge that banks also cannot trade easily with each other because of this new regulatory challenge globally. But we make some good points, good suggestions that we'll take on board as we refine this auction. I must thank you and run off. Thank you for inviting me. I always enjoy my interactions with CZI. I hope I can, in the new year, continue visiting one or two companies or interacting with smaller groups as we continue to refine our policies. But that study is coming, the study on product complexity and complexity map. Then we'll also include this issue of, I've got another idea now, localizing the raw material aspect. We'll include that in our study. The whole issue about shared manufacturing as a model. So I also look forward to the results from that study. I thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Honourable Minister. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution. I think it was King Henry VIII who is reputed to have said to each of his 6 wives, "I won't keep you long." Well, we won't keep you long, but we do want to thank you, Honourable Minister, for sharing with us. And this token of our appreciation from our President is something we would like you to have.
Thank you, Mr. We had you early morning here, and I'm sure you forgo your breakfast. So we've got a very upcoming business that is into breakfast cereals. So we thought you could do with this. This is a new company that has come in, and they are doing fantastically well. It's called Glide Time. So this is the food that they are making.
Is the owner here? congratulate them for a job well done. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will enjoy the breakfast. Thank you for manufacturing my breakfast.
Thank you. Thank you. There's the young man. Yeah.
I need to see.
Yeah.
I think this is the success we are talking about. Yeah. And I like to believe he's in manufacturing now because of the Zimbabwe dollar, not because of you. Is that correct? Yes. Exactly. Let him speak.
No, thank you so much, Minister. First of all, I think we have been participating on the auction system as SMEs, and it has been working very well for us. The only thing that we now need to do is to scale up. So can I be the first beneficiary of the venture capital?
You be beneficiary. I'll make a commitment right here.
Yeah, because if you give us an investment of 5 million, I also assure you in the next 5 years, I'll turn that 5 million to 100 million. And I'm also giving that vow to you in front of everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, congratulations, Leslie. Glide time. And this is your moment, clearly. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation for this first stage of proceedings for our final day. But as we go into tea, we'd like to take some time to acknowledge, if we will, our sponsors today. Please let's put our hands together for Schweppes and Delta, who are providing lunch and dinner for today. Please put our hands together as we appreciate them for their contribution.
Sorry, yes. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. We actually do have our next presenter who has been delayed and is waiting online. So I think we will kindly ask that we remain so that Professor Reinhardt can start his presentation. And maybe I think we probably find a way of getting our tea in rows and bring it back in here. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. So we may remain seated and we will be directed accordingly for tea. Our next presenter, I'll just introduce and hand over to our moderator. He's Professor Eric Reinhardt. You can see him on the screen. I'd like to apologize to him that we are late. Our apologies, Prof. Reinhardt.
No problem.
You probably have come across a book that is How Rich Countries Got Rich and Why Poor Countries Remain Poor. This is the author of that book. They refer to him as a heterodoxical economist. I didn't bite my tongue, but I will not attempt to explain what that actually really means. And he's going to talk to us about our topical issue, which is industrialization, as well as the issue of currency. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it out here this time, but he has promised us that he will be ready to come in February. So Professor Reinhardt will be in the country in February 2022 for in-person interactions with us and our policymakers. I'll hand over to you, Professor Reinhardt. You can go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be back. I was at your annual meeting in Mutare in 2014, and from my several visits to Zimbabwe, you know, I still had my breakfast tea this morning was in the honor of this meeting was Tanganda tea from your country. Let me see if we can share the PowerPoint here. Let's see. I'm starting with some theory, and you see I have some titles here that's in different areas, and I've been working on industrial policy for a long time. And times are shifting, ideologies are shifting, and now I think we're coming back to what has been a conclusion for a very long time. Historically, there's only been one way to create national wealth, except for a few oil exporting countries. No countries have ever gotten rich without industrialization first. This is the conclusion of a former World Bank chief economist, Justin Yifu Lin, and I think that's true. Doesn't necessarily mean that if you have oil, you will be doing very well, but the role of industry is crucial, and I think for the times I've been in Zimbabwe, I've seen that the strangely positive role that apartheid had in making manufacturing industry grow to almost 30% of value added in GDP. So you come from a tradition where something that should be bad, apartheid actually produced something good, which was also something good, which was a high level of manufacturing industry. So a bit of history here. Both communism and Western capitalism agreed on the role of manufacturing. To the right is a stamp from communist East Germany, and to the left is a stamp from communist West Germany, and the only hero they had in common was a gentleman by the name of Friedrich List, who was the industry builder, and he was also the industry builder. He went to the United States. He's historically a very important person who made countries industrialized. And the strange thing that communism agreed on this and capitalism agreed on this. Then came the fall of the Berlin Wall, and something called neoliberalism showed up, and that was an ideology that did not recognize this. But as I'm trying to say now, well, we're coming back to the idea of the importance of manufacturing. So, problem here is that economic activities are qualitatively different. Characteristic manufacturing have different characteristics from agriculture. Increasing returns. Increasing returns means that as the volume of production goes up, costs tend to fall. If you have a manufacturing company and you have a machine running and you have more demand, well, you can run the machine for 16 hours instead of 8 or 24 hours if you have a lot of demand, and cost will fall. This does not happen in agriculture because at one factor of production is limited by nature. You know, if the only thing you want to do is milk, well, then you will get into areas that are less useful for milk. There's a large division of labor, a smaller division of labor, synergies, clusters, dynamic imperfect competition, perfect competition. Perfect competition is when you read in the newspaper what the market is willing to pay for your goods. That does not happen to Bill Gates. Technical change tends to increase wages, and technical change tends to lower prices to consumers who are normally abroad. Stable prices, large price fluctuations, and tends to create a middle class, but in the old days it used to be feudalism. So this is what happens. I give you an example of what happens if you are stuck in one agricultural activity. In the 1960s, Ecuador had a fantastic chance in bananas because there was a disease on all bananas in Central America. So they were left with a huge percentage of the market. But you see what happened. They extended their area cultivated. You see the green thing there is being doubled. But the mirror image of that is that the average yield per hectare went down, because there was really only one province in Ecuador that was ideally suited for bananas. So as you expanded production, you went into less suitable land. So you see here where the green and the reds cross to the left and to the right. Well, that is technological change, but that's being dwarfed in this diminishing return. So it's very dangerous to get into a trap in raw materials. But of course, there are different raw materials. There's a wonderful book from the 1940s on Cuba, Cuban counterpoint of tobacco and sugar. The eastern part of Cuba was sugar, and it was slavery, and it was people with machete, very low paid. The western part of Cuba was tobacco, and tobacco was made by small family companies. It required a lot of care. You know, you harvest it several times a day, and it ended up as a brand product. So I'm not saying that all agricultural activities are alike. I'm saying that it's a big risk to get stuck in them alone. And colonialism, which Africa has seen a lot of, this mentioned that it talks about blacks, but England did exactly the same thing to Ireland. So colonies should be prohibited from weaving or spinning or combing of wool or manufacturing of hats. Indeed, if they set up manufactures and the government afterwards shall be under necessity of stopping their progress, we must not expect that it will be done with the same ease that now it may. So today's mainstream theory no longer distinguishes between manufacturing and raw materials. So countries risk into getting a kind of invisible colonialism. You know, without knowing it, you're getting into this stage, which Zimbabwe was luckily out of. So I think it's one thing to consider here. Why is it that the most efficient farmers in the world, in the US and the EU, still normally need heavy subsidies and heavy duties on import in order to be profitable? You know, Norway is not a member of the EU, so we can buy the best meat in the world from Uruguay or Argentina, whereas in the EU they have heavy duties on meat to support the German and Dutch cows. So you will never become an upper middle class income country if agricultural products are not converted into finished products, and unless manufacturing becomes a higher percentage of your GDP. And strangely enough, it was higher earlier than it is now. I've written this book, was actually based on my own experience in running a manufacturing company for 25 years, and also from traveling around the world. My wife keeps count on that, and I've been working in 72 different countries. And when I come to strange places like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, I find my book in the bookshop in Russia. So this is a theory based on, not on mathematics, but on historical experience. So when I looked up to prepare this presentation, I found that this graph from the World Bank, manufacturing value added as a percentage of GDP. And here is what I mentioned, that at one point in time, the manufacturing was up to almost 30%, or I have other data where it's more than 30% of GDP. And if you take the 150 poorest countries in the world, what they have in common is that none of them have a GDP manufacturing as a percentage of GDP of more than 6%. So what worries me when I look at the statistics is that you may have lost something, which I think you should try to regain. So visiting many factories when I went to Zimbabwe last time, or I've been there 4 times, I think I've been to the country. I found a tariff policy that went against the global income logic of the last 500 years. Raw materials were imported free of duty, while duties increased with increasing value added to the raw material. Finished goods pay the highest duties. And I think this is what I heard the gentleman from Bulawayo mention earlier. And I also found it on a visit in Bulawayo that a pharmaceutical company was faced with paying duties on raw materials used in production, while their foreign competitors could import their finished products free of duty. I would claim that this is a fairly destructive industrial policy. Normally, you should support the value added. And I see in one of the Zimbabwe National Trade Policy, it says that tariffs on all agricultural products are 150%, for non-agricultural products 35%, etc. I think this was wrong at the time, and I think this is maybe an explanation why the manufacturing as a percentage of GDP has fallen from almost 30 to around 6. So you know, I would recommend to have a look at that. I cannot think of any other country. I may be wrong, but I've never seen any other country doing it that way. You clearly have an advantage in many agricultural products because of the climate and the fertility, but still, I think you do want to subsidize the finished product. I mean, if you look at the tariff policies of the United States, if you look at the early Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, look at what they did. They started with zero on raw materials, and more the value added, the higher the tariffs. So we are now in hegemonic shifts. So the leading nation, which is now the US, stops being liberal, stops believing in its own propaganda of free trade, when free trade is no longer in its interest. This has happened first in Holland in the 1720s, then it happened in England in the 1910s, when Germany and the United States were taking over the technological leadership from England. You see the title of the book here, The Strange Death of Liberal England. I think now we have the strange death of liberal United States in its fight with China. And I think this makes everyone look at tariffs in a different way. It makes everyone understand, well, if Donald Trump understood that the United States needed import duties, but they never understood that Africa needed the same. So there is something illogical here for things that are close to home. We use common sense, and for things that are far away like Africa, we use mathematical models from the World Bank and the IMF. So this is a chance, I think, for Africa to change this attitude. In fact, I gave a similar speech 2 days ago in Uganda, and I think they are also feeling this ideological shift. So this is to give you. This is very confusing, but the important thing is to tell you how different manufacturing industries are. So this is 3 values: output, number of wage earners, and wage earners per unit of production, which is productivity in the United States from 1899 to 1937. To the left here, there's the automotive industry. 200,000% increase in output, 20,000% increase in number of wage earners, and wage earners per unit, which is productivity. You see that the wage earners per unit is down almost 90%. Right, and then you have chemicals and glass and paper and pulp and a lot of other activities over there. And you see that to the right, there are some industries that are losing out. Linen goods, carriages, wagons and sleighs, hats, gloves, carpets and rugs, shoes. On the right-hand side, they are living. They are at the other end. There's very little productivity increase. So what's happening is that in the old days, every country used to have arrange all these products. But now what has happened is that the third world is tend to be left with the industries on the right hand, and the rich countries are stuck with the ones on the left hand. So there are more countries in the third world specializing in being poor. I see that the room seems to be fairly empty. Should we have a break? Is it unfair for me to keep people away from their tea?
Sorry, Prof. I think it's the camera direction that is giving a wrong impression. On the other side, there's the room is full of
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The minister. In fact,
Okay.
we have the Minister of Industry, with us.
Yes. Okay, I'll just
He's
go on.
thoroughly taking notes, so I think your input is valuable.
Okay, very, very good. So the main thing here is that how different economic activities are. If you manage to take the world market for cars in that period, you're doing very well. If you end up taking the world market for gloves, you're really doing very poorly. And I think this is an aspect which has been lost with the type of economic theory that took over during the Cold War, that all economic activities tended to be alike, which of course they're not. We know that when we talk to our children, that it's, maybe you should not, if you have a comparative advantage in washing dishes, maybe you shouldn't stick to that. Maybe you should try to upgrade. So there's an important thing here having to do with migration, that the link between economic structure and population carrying capacity. Hunting and gathering societies, if you are in the Amazon in Brazil, you find that 1 to 2 persons per square kilometer is a lot. Agricultural societies outside the really fertile places like in Bangladesh, you'll find that 40 persons per square kilometer is a kind of limit. And industrial society, like Holland, there are 400 persons. So I was once in a cabinet meeting in Eritrea, and they found out that when the population density of Eritrea reached about 40 persons, there were too many and they had to move. And where did they move? Well, they moved, for example, to Holland, where there were 400 persons per square kilometer. So why is it that 40 persons are too many in Eritrea and 400 are not too many in Holland? I think this is something that you should keep in mind, because migration is an issue with you, and you should be aware of this aspect, that the carrying capacity of a country in terms of population depends a lot on the economic structure. What we see dramatically in Europe these days is that the countries that are being deindustrialized, like the Ukraine, also loses a lot of people. So and it's also interesting that, you know, historically famines are normally found in nations specializing in agriculture. In the EU and in the United States, where 2 or 3% of the population works in agriculture, people are dying from eating too much, right? But famines are in India, where a large percentage of the population works in agriculture. So there's some contradictions here, in which I think we could learn from, and we can also learn from what happened to the different former Comecon countries, the former communist countries, because they give us a kind of artificial case studies. They had very different, coming out of communism, they had very different policies. And that policies, these policies give very striking results. You see, to the left, previously, industrialized countries like Ukraine and Serbia and Georgia, in some of them, all the population are poorer than they were under communism, which is very, very strange, because communism was a very inefficient system, production system. So it's actually the deindustrialization. It kind of proves that, you know, it's better to be an inefficient industrial country than to be a very efficient agricultural country, which the Ukraine is. You have some strange things. You see the thing with the green at the bottom, in kind of in the middle there, is Azerbaijan. Well, that's taking oil money and giving it to the poor, so they get richer, right? So the green get richer, and the really red get poorer. Absolutely poor, and the orange ones, income growth below the G7 average. And Belarus is not a very friendly regime. I mean, if you see what's going on these days, you know, in the capital of Belarus, in Minsk, Lenin is still on the square with a raised hand. And they have an industrial policy like they used to have when they were communists. So there's a strange system that the countries that tried to be democratic are forced into the rules of free trade by the IMF and the World Bank, and they get poorer to the left. The countries that have not tried to be democratic, like Belarus, actually keeping the former industrial policy, get richer. So there is a strange system of penalizing the countries that get democratic and giving credit to those who are undemocratic. It's of course, that's not the way it's intended, but that's what's happening. So wages in the Ukraine used to be twice the wages in neighboring Belarus, but now wages are higher in Belarus. So I think there are things to learn from this complex scenario, and it's back to the bottom line of the importance of manufacturing industry. And again, back to the former communist bloc. If you look at the average annual GDP growth or shrinkage from 1989 to 2019, you see at the top, the shrinking ones are Ukraine, Bosnia, Moldova, Montenegro, Georgia, and Serbia. And then you have some with a little growth like Lithuania. You come further down to the neighboring country to Lithuania and Latvia. It's Estonia, which is doing very well with high-tech stuff. And you see at the bottom, there's China, which is doing very well. But a country which is very far down there in terms of more than 4% annual growth over a period of 30 years is Uzbekistan. So we're starting an inquiry now. Well, what on earth is it that Uzbekistan did? You know, why were they so successful? And I've been there and traveled around, and what you see is that they have kept the kind of import substitution policy that used to be popular in Latin America, and they produce fairly sophisticated things. You know, there's a factory there where they produce trucks and buses, and with Japanese technology, but they produce it locally and they assemble cars, and they also have. If you go into the markets in Uzbekistan, you will find that if you want to buy spaghetti, there is a blue box with original Italian buitoni spaghetti, which costs, say, let's say 100. And then next to that, there is a locally produced, almost the same blue color spaghetti box, which costs 50. So the EU has something called smart specialization. I've written a project for them. I can send it to you. Smart specialization is specializing where there is high value added. So what the Ukraine is doing is that they are selling their spaghetti, their wheat to Italy for 400 euro a ton, and they're buying the spaghetti back at 4,000 euro a ton. And what Uzbekistan does is to produce their own spaghetti with their own wheat, which costs a bit more, but that also raises the wages of the workers of Uzbekistan, right? Because wages in the manufacturing sector tend to be much higher than in agriculture. So there's something here to be learned from Uzbekistan of all places, and it's also interesting that how many years under communism kind of changed the religion, and it's. I think we should learn from these countries that are really they're not democratic, but they're well run, and I think this is something to aim for. So I was also asked to say something about currency, but I must admit that the currency issues in Zimbabwe are extremely complicated. I get to that, but there is essentially in economic theory, in continental European theory, not in English-speaking economic theory, there has always been two aspects of the economy, right? You see it like this: there's a real economy, the black box, production of goods and services, and you have the accounting units, the money and the capital. And in good times, as Keynes said, the financial sector is a bridge in time to the real economy. You know, you go to the bank and you get a loan and you get money for a factory that's going to last 50 years. That's fine. But keeping this balance healthy between the financial economy and the real economy is a problem. And when I was in Zimbabwe, especially in 2014 and 15, I was there. We had a U.S. expert, Jan Kregel, who is an expert on currency. We had a ticket for him to Harare from the U.S. He used to be the chief economist of UNCTAD, but the government at the time didn't want him there, so he didn't come. But what surprises me is that things seems to have gone well for a long time, and then you have this fantastic. This is originally from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe is the data. You have a fantastic explosion last year in inflation, and I'm not able to. I haven't found out what was the reason for that, so I can't really come with a strong judgment. But what did happen, I spoke to Jan Kreger, who is the expert on this, and he tied it to the fantastic explosion of very successful explosion in the production of agriculture last year. So it seems that there's a link here between the growth in agriculture and inflation. But why it went down, I don't know. I simply do not have enough data. So recollections from my last visits to Zimbabwe, we were saying that the present situation of Zimbabwe was similar to that of Argentina in the late 1990s, dollarization, which made local manufacturing non-competitive. Zimbabwe wanted at one point to, after the hyperinflation, wanted to peg to the South African rand. As far as I recall, South Africans didn't want it. So he ended up with the dollar. Industrial death and unemployment and smuggling. So the government runs out of liquidity and credits. I found in the Zimbabwe newspaper yesterday that the government last month deducted between 2,000 and 4,000 from salaries of nurses and teachers. So I see some kind of a déjà vu. Well, this is what happens when you are in these situations, and then you get a breakdown of the capacity to import. This is what happened in Latin America in the 70s and 80s. And this is, I think, even more reason to look at your own value added. So we had the Argentine strategy, where there was no funds to pay wages. The Argentinian provinces started printing their own currency. It was absolutely chaotic. You could be in a line at checking out a hotel, and the fourth currency that somebody offered to the cashier, he would accept. He wouldn't accept all the currencies floating around. He would only accept some of them. So that was one solution. And then there was a Cuban strategy. Cuba had one very devalued currency, the peso plus the dollar. US economist Jan Kreger suggested that Cuba added third currency. The Cuban government printed promissory notes promising to pay a certain sum in US dollars. This, in effect, brought the Cuban government into the business of printing dollars responsibly. So this was one of the things we were discussing, and I think I said at the time that in time you need a new currency, but there's so much bad will connected with the Zimbabwe dollar, so you should probably call it something else, because the idea of irresponsibility kind of continued, right? So I think my recommendations at the moment would be, yes, the Minister of Finance needs income, but this income ought to be based more on duties on finished goods than on duties on inputs to the local manufacturing sector. I think when I look at the fall of the manufacturing sector as a percentage of GDP, I think that is really worrisome. It's really, really worrisome. And I understand, of course, that the Minister of Finance needs income. And it's also, I mean, technically, if you look at the schedules of duty, it's simpler to put duty on raw materials than on finished products. I mean, technically, because there's so many voices of groups of imports. But I think this, I think you really should shift I mean, from where I'm sitting in Norway, it looks like you should be shifting the duties more over to raw materials. And you may say that, well, this raw material, we want to work our own tobacco into cigarettes, so we want to keep that whole value chain. That's fine, but I think what I read here from the government is that the 150% for non-agricultural products and 35% for others is a very untraditional policy. I mean, looking at economic history. I did a chapter on the history of economic policy for Oxford University Press, which I can send you. And I think the strategy that you're following is really unique. So I say, in order to become an upper middle class economy, which I understand is a goal, my humble recommendation is that you should try to regain the manufacturing value added to close to 30% of GDP rather than the 6.5%, which is the number now. So I think that will be my my recommendations, which I think are very much in the line of what has been historically successful.
Well, thank you to Professor Reinert for his presentation. At this point, I'm going to hand over once again to James, who will lead the Q&A at this point. So, James, thanks very much. Professor Reinert, thank you for your insights.
Well, my pleasure.
Thank you, Professor. I should say, during the time when you're doing your presentation, our Honorable Minister of Industry was taking notes. I'm sure there are a lot of pointers that she has taken from your presentation and your wide experience from the the international perspective. So we really value your input. In particular, I'm also personally glad that the fact that you're still holding so dearly the Tanganda tea shows that we as Zimbabwean have capacity to produce very good brands that can compete internationally. Yep. So when I saw that, I felt encouraged that there are quite a couple of brands that can hold their own on the international market. So I'm very thankful for that, Professor. And it's also heartening to note that you have said that no country has ever become rich without industrialization. So what it means, definitely, it means if Zimbabwe is to move to a middle-income country by 2030, industrialization has to be at the center of our policy. And it's something that, as business, we will not take lightly, and we will try to take some of your recommendations and try to apply them, as well as the learning experience that you have given us. The examples of your Ecuador, examples of Argentina, I think that these are critical learning points. And I think it's something that we will try to digest and find out what are the learning points from those experiences and try to apply those situations to our own situations. Maybe lastly, Professor, I like the idea that you concluded by giving us indicative targets in terms of the value addition target for manufacturing. And you have noted that manufacturing value addition at about 6.5% of GDP is far too low. And even when you compare to our historical trends, at 6.5, I think we are not performing well. So the target of 30% of manufacturing value addition to GDP, I think it's something that possibly from a policy deliberations, it's something that we will try to to take on board and see how best that can be supported with the real policies that will drive us to that point. With those few words, Professor, maybe let me invite one or two questions from colleagues on the floor. Colleagues, do you have any burning questions regarding the the presentation by Professor? I see one question at the back. Please introduce yourself and maybe direct your question to Professor.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm sure you can be able to hear me. I read from his articles and from his contribution that most of the developed countries benefited immensely. When you look at multinational corporations, they benefited immensely from the contributions of their home governments in terms of market development, financing, and etc. So now, when you look at Zimbabwe, and part of the challenge that we have, especially looking at trade and bilateral agreements, is it possible for us to actually implement policies that can protect home industries from probably unhealthy competition, considering that it's very difficult to have tariff barriers or even non-tariff barriers with the current trade agreements that are there?
Thank you. Professor, there's a question on how to protect our home industries. I think given the fact that maybe one of the things that I may say is, given the fact that we are part of some of these trade agreements that try to sort of liberalize our markets, how do we protect our, home industries in that context?
Well, there are certain things you can do which supports industry. For instance, it's allowed to subsidize research. You can have a development bank, and I think it's very important to understand that the rich countries are cheating a lot. So if you look at aircraft industry, Europe is cheating in one way by subsidizing the Airbus, and the United States is subsidizing their aircraft, perhaps in a different way through military contracts. But they're all cheating, right? So we are in a game where the rich ones are cheating, and they're cheating in a very particular way. I was mentioning if we had a fair world with a natural comparative advantage, the best place to produce beef would be Argentina and Uruguay, grass-fed, right? But the European Union doesn't want that, so they put a tariff on beef from Argentina and Uruguay, and they force Uruguay and Argentina to plant the pampas with soybeans, so that the Dutch and German cows can eat the soybeans that come from Argentina. So you see, Europe managed to get the higher end of the value-added chain at the cost of the third world, right? So I think very important, go into this with the idea that this is a system that was made by the big guys to cheat, and there's also a very interesting case study. If you look at Mexico, NAFTA integrating into the US, what happened was that the things that were mechanizable, production of wheat and maize or corn, that died out almost in Mexico. Mexico used to be the place for maize, but the Americans dumped their excess wheat to Mexico, and Mexico became a specialist in things that couldn't be mechanized: strawberries and citrus fruits. So I think it's very important to keep this idea of how much value added can be done for each economic activity. I think that is a trick, and there are movements in Africa for trade, and trade is always good when it's symmetrical. Trade between countries at the same level of development is always good. So I think if you keep that in mind and make free trade agreements with neighbors that are roughly on the same level of development, that's fine. But there's also been a problem in Africa with, we used to call it the spaghetti bowl of trade agreements that you know the East Africa had one parliament but two different trade agreements. So it's been very messy, right? But I think it can be done by keeping these things alive. And I think you have an example of you know what Nestlé has been doing. I visited their factory, and I think this is exactly an example of what you want to do. You produce the milk, and you add a lot of value to that milk in the Nestlé factory. I think this is the kind of structure you want to build. It doesn't have to be a multinational corporation. I think we had an example here where it was a local, but I think that's the idea. So welcome foreign investors when they want to add value to your products, but not when they want to sell their finished products. That would be my comment. So there are ways around it, and everybody else is cheating.
Thank you, Professor. Then one more question. Please go ahead.
Hello, is that going through now?
Yeah, please,
okay.
Please go ahead.
Professor, my name is Clive Oxton Willows. I'm a manufacturer in the cold chain industry in Bulawayo. A lot of what you said, some of it went over the top of my head, unfortunately, but what certainly didn't was that where you've said that us as importers for raw materials, we are still paying duties on raw materials, which is, you said, that's got to get dropped. So that's one thing that is quite clear. And then also retooling is quite a big thing that needs to be done here in Zimbabwe for manufacturers to, I think, prosper, for the country to prosper, and for us to do export. But thank you for your comments on that.
Professor, I hope you heard that. I think Mr. Clive was generally in agreement with your statement. I think you, if I put it well, you said, you know, we should not be, you spoke about duties on finished goods, vis-a-vis duties on inputs for local industries. And I think Mr. Clive here was in general agreement with your statement around what we should be doing around those duties.
Yes, and I think when I traveled around Zimbabwe, I went from Bulawayo all the way up north, visiting dead and dying factories, and I was very impressed that you used to have a factory producing plows. You know, your agriculture production was so advanced that you produced your own plows, and I think these are probably the industries. I think that had died out by the time I visited it. My example with the pharmaceutical industry, which had the problem of paying duty on their raw materials, but their foreign competitors could import duty free. I think this is, if there's one, I understand, you know, that was also Bulawayo. So I think it's this is the big point. This is an important point. But I think you should also look at the technological possibilities. I visited a farm where there was no electricity before, but they had already several years ago. They had solar panels. So you may also take this possibility of decentralizing. Now there is 3D printing, which is making it possible to you know, the economies of scale in some manufacturing areas disappear. So perhaps you can do more. So I agree with this gentleman that this is really an important thing. But by all means, look at new technologies like 3D printing, which may make you competitive at smaller volumes than you would otherwise have. So perhaps you could make a national industry of what used to be an international industry. And retooling, clearly, that's part of the upgrading which is necessary.
Thank you, Professor. I don't see any further questions, but I'm sure the colleagues will have your contact details should they want to engage further outside this meeting. I'm sure they will be able to contact you and reach you on your contact details. Otherwise, thank you for your time, and we appreciate the international flair that you brought to the conference, and I think those were very key learning points, Professor. Keep safe, and please, thank you so much for what you've done.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm not sure what else we are going to do. Maybe let me wait for guidance in terms of what is our next move. I think there should be a presentation coming in, if I remember well. Colleagues, assist me in terms of the next program.
Many thanks, James. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention so far. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I must apologize. You'll notice there's a flurry of activity. I suspect that we are now in the company of the Vice President, and he should be joining us not too long from now. So we ask you to remain seated and in anticipation of his imminent arrival. But even as that happens, things go on. I'm delighted to report to you that we still have, as you can see, the collection for charity running outside. So if your organization wants to also contribute, you'll notice we have a growing list of participants there, including the likes of Cashel Valley, Nestle, Crystal Candy, Kengrow, all of which have been contributing to this worthy cause. These will be handed over to the Vice President before he takes his leave. So we encourage you to participate in that. But for the next 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, please allow us to also invite one of our key sponsors, the Pulse Medical Group. They're going to chat to us about another, well, in fact, share with us a few health tips that they have for today. So please, Masimba, come through. Thanks very much for giving a round of applause.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Masimba. I'm from the Pulse Group. The Pulse Group is an organization which does medical distribution of drugs, medical equipment, laboratory equipment. So what I need to talk to you about is about the COVID pandemic. We all have been affected one way or the other. So the first day when I came in, I gave out some pulse oximeters. So what I'm going to share with you is that the experience that I've had as a clinician. So with regards to COVID is a disease that is actually affecting the lung capacity to take the 21% oxygen which is within the atmosphere and then concentrate it and be able to feed it within our body. So the first thing that is going to happen to most of us is that you're going to realize that your oxygen concentration levels are going to go down if you are infected. So a normal adult should be having 95% and above of oxygen saturation, which is what we expect one to have. But then if it so happens that it does go down, that means that there is a source of problem, which could be COVID. So I encourage everybody within this auditorium to have what we call a pulse oximeter. So this pulse oximeter is the one that you can use. This is a very cheap gadget that you can keep in your house, you can keep in your car, and I would prefer to use the pulse oximeters more than the use of the temperatures. So I find out that if I go to a restaurant or to a shop, the guys are busy taking your temperature. when you do get to find a patient who has got a temperature which is already going up, that means that they've been infected for quite some days and they're already too ill. But then for those that are newly infected, you'll find the first thing that is going to start going down is the oxygen saturation levels. So for those also who haven't seen what we call oxygen concentrators, we do have them outside. And for those who have also not had an opportunity to see what we call ventilators, we do have them outside. And then also the equipment that actually tests for COVID, you have got an opportunity to see them outside. So from the Pulse group, you'll be able to come and see all those equipment. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. What we are going to do is take a 10-minute break to facilitate as you can see, shifting of furniture and preparation ahead of the Vice President's arrival. So we'll ask you to take strictly 10 minutes while they prepare, and then we will reconvene in that time. So thank you very much for your attention, and we will see you shortly.
Let me just clean it.
I did. Okay. You know what? I'll just get it from you.
No, getting over. I got a tour. You will. Please rise to your feet, ladies and gentlemen, as our guest of honor, the ex-entry. We'll ask you to remain standing, ladies and gentlemen, as we anticipate a recital of the national anthem. Thank you. Thank you all. Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we take this opportunity to welcome you once again. Indeed, the moment we have been anticipating is here, and we take this opportunity to welcome His Excellency, Honorable Dr. Constantino G.D.N. Chiwenga, our Vice President, and also Minister of the Health and Childcare Ministry. We are honored indeed to have you here with us, Your Excellency. The depth and breadth of your portfolio makes your acceptance of our invitation even more special, and we are grateful for your presence here for this, the annual Congress of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries. So we are grateful to you, and we are looking forward to a pleasant and fruitful time together. Likewise, we are delighted for the second day this week to host the Minister of Industry and Commerce, Honourable Dr. CZI Nzenza. It is a pleasure to host you again, Madam, and we appreciate your commitment to this cause and indeed your support throughout our conference. We also take this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to appreciate the President of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, Mr. Kurai Macheza, our President. We say to you good morning and welcome, good afternoon actually. And likewise, the CZI National Consultative Committee, we welcome all of you, all of the members represented here. Likewise, the Chief Executive Officer of the CZI, Mrs. Sekai Kuvarika, we say to you good afternoon, ma'am, and welcome. Captains of industry and other delegates represented here, it is a delight to have you. Thank you for your support of this event. Good afternoon to everybody. At this point, I take my leave and welcome all, and the program will continue with our guest of honor who will now proceed to give us his address. Our program, ladies and gentlemen, will begin indeed with our president, Mr. Kurai Macheza, who will give us the opening remarks. Mr. Kurai Macheza, sir, good afternoon and welcome. We anticipate your address.
The Vice President of Zimbabwe, Honorable Dr. Chiwenga, the Minister of Industry and Commerce, Dr. Sekai Nzenza, the government ministers here present, Deputy Minister, Honorable Musabayana, other deputy ministers here present, permanent secretaries here present, senior government officials, distinguished guests, National Council members of CZI, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would want to highlight to you where we have come from in two ways. We have a past that is called former glory, and we have a past that is also protracted and vicious cycle relationship with our current challenges. We would therefore like to focus today on possible future as we are right in the dawn of a new era. We are at the dawn of Vision 2030, an upper middle income economy. This is a vision we all want to realize, and it is a whole new world. Where have we come from? The good old days, we were industrializing, we were growing the economy. Manufacturing was at the center of it all, with a GDP contribution of 20%. The declining days, what were they? Deindustrialization, economic decline, persistent microeconomic instability. Stability was on and off and off and on again, and political polarization. In terms of manufacturing, we are saying we have got to be central to everything that happens in Zimbabwe. In terms of agriculture, in terms of services, in terms of mining, in terms of commerce. Without manufacturing, all those sectors are also inhibited and can't grow. So manufacturing is at the center of it all. Services obviously feed into manufacturing. For mining, it's both ways. Manufacturing feeding into mining and also mining feeding into manufacturing, so as with agriculture. Now, when we look into the imperatives for where we want to go as an economy and as a country, obviously the need for transformation is key. It is an opportune moment for policy retakes. And by retaking, it's just re-looking at the policies that we have to make sure they are aligned to what we want to achieve as a country and in terms of realizing our vision 2030. Here I'm talking of our current industrial policy tenure. It's ending 2023, and it's time for it to be reviewed and to come on the table. Current trade policy, with the call for transformation in NDS1, competitiveness is at the core of all our imperatives. The phases of industrialization towards 2030, they are broken into three. This phased approach is aimed at addressing key binding constraints and opportunities in the short, medium, and long term to achieve industrial competitiveness. And those three phases are balanced orientation to competitiveness. And in this phase, the goal will be to generate sufficient foreign reserves and increase confidence to introduce and maintain a stable and competitive local currency. Phase 2, industrial transformation or upgrading. The goal in this phase will be for domestic and regional market capture, export diversification, and integration in regional and global value chains. The third phase, which is industrial excellence. The goal in this phase will be specialization in lucrative and labor skills-intensive production. Now, putting the industrialization agenda into context. The strategic vision of the industrial agenda under NDS1 is to contribute to economic structural transformation by moving Zimbabwe's economy up the value chain through industrial transformation. This requires the Zimbabwe economy to aim to be the most competitive place to do business in the region and on the continent. This, we are talking about the regional bodies and the wider African continental free trade area. Thus, implementing a radical competitiveness agenda will build a competitive private sector that will maximize linkages, deliver quality jobs, and support long-term growth. Zimbabwe should regain productive hub status through becoming the most efficient and most competitive place of production in the region and the continent, with increasing its attractiveness for all types of investments. In conclusion, I would like to end my submission with the following. A competitive economy will drive economic growth and achieve the desired vision 2030 of an upper middle income economy. The ultimate goal of competitiveness is the prosperity of a nation's people, per capita living standard. It is not just for industry or a certain segment of the economy. This makes competitiveness a non-negotiable in the pursuit of Vision 2030. The fundamental source of long-term prosperity is the productivity which we can utilize our human capital and natural resources to produce the needs of the country. Obviously, this assumes a lot of other issues are corrected, which are the current challenges, which I would want to highlight to you, Honorable Vice President. And some of these issues, we have talked about them in the briefing room. The current question, we say this has remained in our albatross on our ambition for growth. Solving this question will help us secure Vision 2030. Without resolving the current question, we'll be in a vicious cycle as has been before. There are other challenges as well. The electricity is an issue. The ease of doing business is a question that we need to address. But together, we can do it. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm here to introduce our next speaker, who is going to give us some inputs. As CZI, we have also taken a deliberate decision to reach out to some of our diaspora who are working in various capacities and who have deployed their expertise in other economies. Yesterday, we had one Zimbabwean coming out of South Africa to talk to us about tooling the manufacturing sector and bringing in lessons from there. So we have decided that we can still tap the expertise of our colleagues that are not in the country to contribute to better policy making, but also to contribute to enterprise competitiveness. Yesterday, we were challenged by Tapiwa Samanga coming out of South Africa to look at enterprise competitiveness through tooling. So I'm here to introduce the next speaker, another Zimbabwean. His name is Cornelius Chiquama, Dr. Chiquama. He's a senior advisor in the Office of the Chief Economist of the Scottish Government. So he's here to share with us some insights and ideas that we may consider as we deliberate. Over to you, Cornelius. You can go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much, Sekai. I don't know if you can all hear me or see me. So first of all, good afternoon to the Vice President, the Minister, other ministers in the room, leaders of industry, colleagues and friends. What I'm going to do this afternoon is to basically talk you through what I'm calling the industry currency nexus when I look at the Zimbabwe economic situation. I will put up some slides that I will talk to very briefly. Let me see if I can do that now, actually. I think you should have the slides now on screen. So the main aim of my presentation really is to look at the interaction between industrialization and the currency challenge that we face in Zimbabwe. The aim is also to provide a framework that will hopefully help us think through solutions to the currency in terms of long-term solutions, but also how that would contribute to improving our industries. In terms of what I will cover, I will start off with a brief history of the currency problem, the currency challenge, mainly to set the context of where we are now. I will talk a bit about the idea of floating the exchange rate. I think this is an idea that comes quite a lot when people are debating currency issues. The main aim there is to try and bring out some of the considerations that we need to pay close attention to around macroeconomic instability. I will then talk a bit about how should we be characterizing the currency issue, which will then lead us to what I'm presenting as a high-level policy framework, which will get us to think about, what is the right pace of economic growth for our country? What role can industry and trade play in advancing Zimbabwe's economic transformation, the role of industry and investment, government programs, and also consumption. And then I will finish off with some concluding remarks. Now, when I look at the history of the currency issue in Zimbabwe, I think those who've old enough will remember the 80s when Zimbabwe ran a very strict quota-based foreign currency allocation process where each person had an allowance of how much foreign currency they could draw on each year. If you wanted to travel, you'd go to the bank, apply for travelers' checks. You know, you wait a week, your travelers' checks come back, and it's written at the back of your passport that you've been allocated a certain amount of time, amount of currency. Now, what this tells us is, you know, this challenge has been with us for a very long time. This idea of operating a strict quota-based system was trying to manage limited foreign currency supplies that we had at the time. Things got a little bit better in the 90s, but in my view, I think what we were doing there is we were merely capitalizing the currency problem into debt. So we got a lot of restructuring support packages from the IMF and World Bank that provided currency. It gave a bit of a relief to that problem, but I'm not sure the problem went away. Many of you will remember 14 November 1997, some call it Black Thursday, when the Zim dollar crashed, and I think this coincided with the announcements of the support package for the war vest compensation. Now, many people think it's the war vest compensation package which caused the problem, but when you look at the data at the time, actually Zimbabwe's import cover was very, very limited during that period. We did not have enough foreign currency reserves. So in my view, it's an issue of, you know, coincidence, certain events happening at the same time to some extent. We get into the 2000, the problem becomes quite acute. You know, the 2008 hyperinflation period. We then went over the 5-year period where we had dollarization as a solution. But again, that was a temporary solution which started presenting its own challenges. So in my view, the currency issue is probably as old as the country, or at least as old as I am. Now the question is, what do we do about it? In the last 2 years, we've tried various solutions to deal with how we allocate foreign currency, especially since we've introduced the new Zim dollar, if I can call it that. The interbank market didn't quite take off. We now have the Dutch auction system, which I think was promising at the start. It's performed exceptionally well in terms of stabilizing things. But I think the challenge that we are beginning to see is, you know, the backlog around foreign currency disbursements and the growing divergence between the parallel market and the auction rate. Now, I think it is this divergence which others have argued, no, let's just float the currency, you know, that will get rid of arbitrage and we get an equilibrium exchange rate. Now, as an economist, I would say floating the exchange rate is definitely the right thing to do. It has a lot of advantages. It means at any point, the market is clearing. And what that means is, you know, we get the price that matches the value of the currency that we have. Hopefully, it then delivers convergence between the parallel market and the official rate, which, you know, it is an equitable way of selling foreign currency for those who are generating it. But I think this is a big but. There's always a question, will floating the exchange rate deliver a stable equilibrium? Now, if we listen to the Minister of Finance speak in the morning, he talked a lot about the challenge of stability of the currency. So the issue is not the price at which we are selling the currency. The issue is going to be stability. Can the currency be maintained at that level? So I will talk a little bit about stability and then move on to the issues of industrialization, how industrialization can help us with that. I was going to talk about these graphs, just trying to show that stability is not guaranteed, but I will skip that given we need to move quickly to the substantive issues. But the main conclusion from these graphs was if you really go through how market dynamics tend to work, and we look at our current situation in Zimbabwe, it's highly unlikely that if we floated the exchange rate, we would get a stable rate for our currency. Now, by stability, what we mean is not a fixed value at which the currency will stay forever and ever. What we basically mean is the currency will have a tendency to converge towards a certain value. It can move up and down around that value, but generally there's some level of certainty of where the currency will be in the long term. The issues that tend to suggest to me that we are unlikely to have a stable currency is our demand for foreign currency at the moment is less responsive to the value. It's less responsive to the exchange rate. And this is due to a number of factors. The first factor is our external debt situation and the debt servicing obligation that comes with it. So if you have to make scheduled payments to pay the debt, you have to make those payments irregardless of what the value of the US dollar to the Zimbabwean dollar is. Government has done a remarkable job of investing in infrastructure. The Minister of Finance talked about the energy programs. We've seen water related investments going up across the country. We all need these things to advance prosperity for Zimbabwe and its people. But again, it comes with huge demands on foreign currency. The third issue is around our ability to substitute for some of the things that we import. So a lot of our inputs, we are currently not in a position to substitute for them. So for those reasons, it means, when the price of the US dollar goes up in Zim dollar term, our demand doesn't always adjust. So that then creates a situation where the price keeps going up. Expectations also play an important role in determining the value of currency. Now, for those economists in the room, I think you will recognize this typology of expectations when thinking about currency. They are what we call regressive expectations. So this is situations where, if a currency depreciates, the expectations is in the future, either that depreciation will slow down or actually the currency may appreciate, may recover. We also have what we call extrapolative expectations. Now, this is a situation where if a currency depreciates, there's a fear that it will continue to depreciate. So people who hold that currency will start getting rid of it. And by so doing, that actually then accelerates the rate at which the currency depreciates. Then finally, we have what we call constant expectations. So this is where, people do not worry too much about what direction the currency might take in the long term. Any depreciation that happens now, it's not likely to result in depreciations in the future. Now, when I look at our situation, I've battled with this question: where do I think our currency lie in this typology? I call friends, family in Zimbabwe. I know what they feel and what they think about the currency. My feeling is we are probably in the extrapolative expectation phase. Now, what does this mean? It means we really have to approach the currency issue with a huge degree of caution. We have to manage those expectations very delicately. If people are afraid that the Zim dollar is going to depreciate, they will start getting rid of the Zim dollar, and that in itself becomes a self-fulfilling thing. So what this tells us is we have all the ingredients or the recipe for an unstable currency. Floating the exchange rate would be a sensible thing to do, but on its own, it's not going to be enough to deliver the currency that we want. I was just playing around with words there, and I was imagining, if you are cooking and the fire has died out, you don't change the pot. You have to make the fire again. So that is the challenge we face. We need to start the fire, or we need to make the fire stronger and hotter. And that is the challenge that I put forward for our industrialists. Now, what does this problem actually mean in practice? As a policymaker, I have learned over the years to try and characterize the problem that I am dealing with. And generally, I work with two kind of buckets of where I put problems into. They are what I tend to refer to as technical problems. So these are problems where the solution is known, or there's an expert who's going to give you the perfect answer for your problem. So all you need to go is, turn up at that expert, they'll give you the answer, you implement it, and your problem goes away. So you broke your leg, you go to the hospital, they'll do an x-ray, they see where the leg is broken, pin it together, and you just have to rest, and the problem will resolve over time. But we also have what we call adaptive problems. Now, these are problems where the issues are deep-rooted, and you can see where I'm going with this. Our problem, if we go back to the 1980, we battled with currency issues. If the solution exists, it doesn't exist in one place. The challenge there is galvanizing efforts from different parts of society to work together to solve that problem. And the solution is not going to be immediate. And because the solution is not going to be immediate, we really have to find a way of adapting to the problem while we seek a solution. And in my view, this is the approach that we need to take with the currency issue. I don't see a magic wand that we can wave today, the currency issue resolves, and everything is going to be perfect. We have to look at it as an adaptive challenge. I thought I'd put this up just for policymakers in the room. There's a fantastic book which is Leadership Without Easy Answers. So worth having a look at that if you want to understand a bit more about how to analyze these types of problems. Now, because we do not have answers, what am I going to suggest?
Cornelius, I am going to make the suggestion, if I may. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
If you don't mind, we ask you to indulge us. The Vice President has a really tight schedule, so we are going to suggest that we defer the remainder of your program until a little bit later on. Are you comfortable with that, and then we can come back to you later?
Yeah, I think that should be fine. I think I can hold on for another 30 minutes or so.
Thank you, Cornelius. In which case we move swiftly along and invite our Honourable Minister in charge of Industry and Commerce, Honourable Seka Nzenza, to come through and handle this part of proceedings. Honourable Minister, please come through, ma'am. Hello, Cornelius. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Ah, right. Another change yet again. So please continue and finish your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'll put the presentation back up.
Thank you.
So what do we do with the challenge? So this is kind of the industrialization part. In my view, I think there are five key areas that we need to look at very carefully as policymakers. The first one is around economic growth. What level of growth do we need, or do we want, or can we afford, given the currency challenge? So I'll talk a bit about that. What is the role of industry from a trade perspective? What is the role of industry from an investment perspective? And what do we expect from government and consumers? Now, when I look at demand for currency is derived. The more income people have, the more they want to save, and save in a currency that they believe is going to be stable. The more people want to invest, and the more goods they want to buy. Now, what growth does, growth is a fantastic thing, and I'm really pleased to see results for the last year. Economic growth will increase transactional demand for money, but it also comes with what I term portfolio effects. This is people looking at their wealth. How do they want to store their wealth? Now, this may actually result in increase in demand for foreign currency. And we probably saw a bit of this following the successful agricultural season that we had. The huge payouts to farmers may have actually put pressure on the domestic currency as people were trying to convert into US dollars. And where you face an unstable markets, this can then present huge challenge in terms of currency stability and wider macroeconomic instability as well. So what I'm trying to get at here is, once you grow, there is a danger that growth actually creates instability. And once you've created that instability, it often results in central banks moving very quickly either to manage money supply or to increase interest rates to cool the economy down. Now, these measures of reducing money supply or raising interest rates are trying to moderate economic growth down. So the key message here is foreign currency shortages are going to be a constraint on growth, either directly because we have to proactively moderate our pace of growth to avoid the economy overheating and to avoid the macroeconomic instability that comes with that, or we let that instability creep in and we then respond to it by raising interest rates to bring things down. Now, if we are going to be in this situation where we have to be raising interest rate, controlling money supply, potentially controlling government expenditure as well, to avoid the economy overheating, it raises the question, what is going to be the implication for the pace at which we can move at to reach our goal for higher middle income status? I mean, this is a question for policymakers, but I think it is a question that we need to confront with honesty. What level of growth can we actually afford?
Organizations, distinguished stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media fraternity. Honorable Vice President, this is the third day of the CZI Congress. I was here to give my opening remarks when CZI started 2 days ago. And then yesterday, Honorable Vice President, as you know, I wasn't here. Both of us were in Gokwe. I'm bringing this up, Honorable Vice President, because in Gokwe, the President, His Excellency Dr. Mnangagwa, and yourself were promoting the growth of small grains such as munga, mafunde in that region, and also promoting value addition. Not only that, Honorable Vice President, you spoke about some of the natural resources that we have, such as mauyu, and how that can be made or translated into a health foods drink. So in so many ways, Honorable Vice President, we are speaking of the localization of our local production and also addressing issues to do with moving up that value chain. Honorable Vice President, we are here today as a testimony to the dialogue that has already started between government and the private sector. We are, so to speak, re-engaging. Also beginning, Honorable Vice President, to talk about the challenges that we have. Earlier on when Professor Mtuli was here, we also talked about some of the challenges, issues to do with energy. We just saw what happened just now. Transport, fuel, and how this is increasingly making it difficult for the cost of production. But what's important is that we as government are listening and we're willing to engage and address these challenges. But Honorable Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, what's exciting about this moment is that Zimbabwe's industrialization transformation has started. We are the fastest growing economy in the SADC region, and we must keep up this momentum. And also, before I close, the re-engagement agenda and bringing in investors to Zimbabwe. Honorable Vice President, you were recently in Dubai. You positioned Zimbabwe so well that when you addressed the audience, after your speech in which you spoke about Zimbabwe within the Second Republic, there was standing ovation. So much that when you left the room, everybody got up and started following you, which clearly shows we have a good story to tell, internally as well as externally. So this is the right moment to tell the Zimbabwean story. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now a great pleasure for me to introduce to you our Honorable Vice President, who you already know. But I just want to mention that apart from being the Vice President, he is the Minister of Health. And he has led the mitigation against COVID-19. Within Africa, Zimbabwe stands out there as a success story in terms of addressing the COVID-19. It's also a success story in the way the Honorable Vice President has led the vaccination program. We want to thank you, Honorable Vice President, and I believe the private sector here, may you please join hands in thanking the Vice President for his leadership. You allow me, Honorable Vice President, not to go deeply into a very, very long CV, but I will highlight just a couple points. That you were appointed Vice President of the Republic of Zimbabwe on the 22nd of 2017. And what these captains of industry may not know, Honorable Vice President, is that apart from your outstanding military background, you have academic achievements. You have an executive diploma in business leadership and a first-class master's degree in business administration. You also hold a master's degree in international relations with the University of Zimbabwe, and a doctorate in ethics that you attained from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. Because of your sound understanding of the private sector and of business, you are leading the economic ministries within the government. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my greatest honor